Hey everybody, Matt Bove here. We are expecting the NFL schedule will be released either this week on May 9th or next Thursday. Interesting, May 9th kind of would be what they have traditionally done, the second Thursday of the month. But last week the NFL released a teaser video and it didn't say a date on it, it just said coming in May. So maybe that means it's going to be a week later than we thought it was going to be. Regardless, we should know the schedule within the next 2 weeks, maybe even sooner rather than later. But what do we think about the Bills' schedule? My big takeaway, so myself, along with Sal Capaccio from WGR 550, we do a podcast. It's always game day in Buffalo. And every year we have on the vice president of broadcast with the NFL. His name is Mike North. It's my favorite episode that we do every single year. And he'll tell us some things about the schedule, and then we can implement what he tells us, make educated guesses, and try and kind of put it together with the Bills' schedule and get a better idea of what we can expect. As we are either a couple days away from the schedule release or a week and a half away from the schedule release, I think there's a very strong chance we see the Bills play on a holiday this year. And when I say holiday, I mean either Thanksgiving or Christmas Day. Here's the reasoning behind both. With Thanksgiving, it's pretty simple. We know the Bills are going to Detroit this year. That game was awesome 2 years ago. The NFL could say, let's run it back. Let's have Buffalo go to Detroit for that first game on Thanksgiving. We know it'll put up a huge number. It'll be a good game. It'll kind of start the day well, really on the right foot. So I think there's a possibility there. But I also think there's a possibility that the Bills could host or be on the road for the Thanksgiving evening game. Detroit starts the day. The Cowboys have the middle window every year. But that last game, like the Bills have played a lot of Thanksgiving games. They now played that game against Dallas a couple years ago. They played against the Saints on the road in the late window. Then they played the Detroit game 2 years ago. It would not shock me if the Bills hosted a Thanksgiving game or if they went on the road again. But it just feels like the Bills hosting a Thanksgiving Eve game would do really good numbers. And Mike North has even told us on the podcast, listen, people are watching the first game, they're watching the second game. You need to give them a good game or else they're going to either go to bed or they're going to go Black Friday shopping and they're going to tune you out. The Bills are still a big draw, so that's why I think there's a chance we see them on Thanksgiving. And honestly, it's a pretty good chance because we could see them in that first game or we could see them in the last game. The only one we know they won't play in is the middle game, the one in Dallas. Then that brings us to Christmas. As far as Christmas is concerned, this is what Mike North told us. Christmas falls on a Wednesday this year. So with Christmas falling on a Wednesday, the league needs to play 2 games the Saturday beforehand. So it's basically the same turnaround as a normal would be a Sunday to a Thursday game. But now it's Saturday to Wednesday. And because of that, they'll likely have these games both be division games. So here's a hypothetical scenario, but the Bills could play the Patriots on the Saturday before Christmas, and then on Christmas Day, they could play the Jets or the Dolphins. And then the Jets and Dolphins could play the Saturday before Christmas, and then one of them could play the Patriots on Christmas Day. Basically, you need the entire division playing on the Saturday, and you need the entire division playing on Christmas Day. Just the optics of it feels like, once again, people like watching the Bills. We're biased here because they've been pretty good. People love watching Josh Allen. People love watching the theatrics of the snow coming down, especially on Christmas Day. And when we asked Mike North if the Bills were an option on Christmas Day, here's what he said.
Who has the Christmas game this year, and how does that
That's
all
a great question. You want it?
Yes.
You want it?
No, oh, goodness gracious. I thought you meant, I meant network.
Ooh.
No.
He meant the network, but I don't think Bills fans want the game. I think
Neither.
tell Mike we don't want the Christmas game.
As we sit here today on April 22nd, not only do we not know the teams, we do not know the broadcast partners. Everybody's very interested. Over these last couple of years, you've seen NFL viewership for Christmas Day really kind of explode. And we might have even talked about this before. Like, I don't think we went into this season thinking we were going to play on Christmas. It's a Wednesday, right? We don't play on Wednesday unless, something weird happens during COVID. Like we went into this season not really leaning into, playing on Christmas. But when you see the viewership levels that we were able to generate last year for a Chiefs game, an Eagles game, and then that Baltimore San Fran game, you're talking about 25, 28, 29, 30 million people watching on Christmas Day. Like, that feels like too big of an opportunity to pass up. So The owners talked about it at the meeting back in March, and they all agreed, yep, we should figure out a way to get to Wednesday. It's going to require games being played on the previous Saturday. We do Sunday to Thursday all the time. This would be Saturday to Wednesday. So those are, new windows for us, and trying to figure out which teams make the most sense and which broadcast partners make the most sense. And again, they're new windows. They're kind of out of thin air. So talking to all the broadcast partners, not just broadcast streaming, talking to everybody, what's the right move for the fan? What's the right move for the business? What's the right move strategically? Literally, as we sit here today, we do not know, but we're certainly solving for something fun and interesting and big, and an excuse to sneak away from the family for a few hours on Christmas.
Do the Bills fit that mold of a team? Because when you said the Christmas game last year, those were 3 different games, but now this is a standalone game. Are they one of the teams?
The challenge is, what we have to do is, if we're going to play the previous Saturday and then we're going to come back the following Wednesday, you're talking about 4 teams that all play each other, some sort of round robin, and they're going to play, A versus B and C versus D on Saturday, and then come back on Wednesday and A versus C and B versus D. So you got to find 4 teams that all play each other that we think, sitting here in April, are going to be relevant for 2 national windows each, Saturday, December 21st, and then again come back on Wednesday, the 25th. So you think about, how do you find 4 teams that all play each other? Your mind instantly goes to, find me a division. Find me any division that we think is going to be competitive down the stretch. So Buffalo, Miami, Jets, New England. Is the AFC East going to be up for grabs in week 16 and 17 of the NFL season? I think we're going to want to see who New England ends up with as a quarterback. And then, if not the AFC East, then is there another division that's super competitive that we think is going to come down to the wire? And can you find 4 teams that all play each other? They're going to play this little round robin and have 4 national television windows late in the year that we're guessing in April are going to be playoff relevant, 8 months from now. That's a tall task.
And then one other thing. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Do you know the time of that game? Is there a tentative when
haven't decided yet. I mean, I think, what we saw last year, don't forget, we played the triple header each of the last 2 years. Of those 6 games, the game that generated the most viewership across both years, all 6 games, was the early game last year. Sorry. Granted, it was a Chiefs game. It was a Chiefs Raiders game. It was competitive. It went down to the wire. Raiders actually ended up beating them. Yeah. So that's the recipe, right? Close game, underdog with the lead, favorite with the ball, trying to tie it up at the end. Like, that's what keeps people tuned into their television. But, what is Christmas Day, right? Do we open presents in the morning and then, heck, we're ready for football at 1:00, right? You think about Thanksgiving, it's the opposite, right? The dinner's at the end of the day, so we're watching football during the day. We're still learning what Christmas is and what our fans are most interested in. But the fact that 29 million people watched at 1:00 in the afternoon tells you that the viewership is there. The viewership base is there. If we can get the right game and the right matchup and a compelling close game. If we're only playing 2 games, I don't know if we're going to do 1 and 4, but maybe you slide them more to like the 3 and 6:30 model, like we do on the playoff Sundays. Maybe you do go 4 and 8. The problem with 8 is, you guys know from being in primetime so much these last couple of years, is it gets late on the East Coast and you get to 11:00. And if the game is not competitive, you do start to see that viewership kind of wander off the cliff. And, not too early, not too late. I don't know exactly where that's going to be right now. And again, I think part of it will depend on the broadcast partner. Depending on which partner ends up with the game, they'll surely have some thoughts on the right window for them, whether it's for the domestic audience here or a global audience, if it's one of the streaming partners.
Okay, so we shall see what happens, but I think there is a good chance the Bills play on a holiday this year. My other takeaways from the conversation with Mike North: just expect that the Bills are going to be playing in either the maximum amount of primetime games, which is 6, or close to it. Now, when we say primetime games, though, we do not just mean they have to be traditional night games. It basically means games that are not Sunday at 1:00 or Sunday at 4:00, non-Sunday afternoon games. I think the Bills will host multiple evening games. I think, like I said, they'll maybe even play on a holiday. They'll probably be on the road for a couple primetime games. The interesting thing here, though, is they won't stack this. It'll be very similar to last year, or it could be very similar to last year, where we saw the primetime games a little bit more split up in Orchard Park. You know, like I think when the schedule came out, a lot of people were really surprised about the Thursday night Bucks game or the Monday Night Football Broncos game. Those were not things that were on the radar. I don't think the league wants to put a bunch of primetime games late in the season in Buffalo just with the threat of potential weather playing an impact, like we saw with Pittsburgh last year, and then having to move that game, especially if it's like a Monday night game. If you have a Monday night game and then you all of a sudden have really bad weather, you don't have an easy place to move it to. So I think that the league will try and keep the primetime games played in Buffalo earlier in the season, which is also a win for fans because then it's better weather and then it's earlier in the year and it's just a little bit more of a better vibe to go to a game. So I do anticipate the Bills are going to get like 5 or 6 primetime games. But the other thing that's very interesting that people want to know about is the matchup with Stefon Diggs and the Houston Texans, which brings us to another conversation we had on the podcast.
How much does revenge play a factor into the NFL schedule? Because perhaps you've heard the Bills have this receiver that they traded to another really good team in the AFC, and a lot of people are wondering when we're going to watch that game.
And if I can, Mike, if I can ask, like, did it matter when that happened to you, right? Like, did the Bills Texans game become a little different in the eyes of the schedule makers on April 3rd when Stefon Diggs was traded there?
Did it become a little different? Yes. Did it become a lot different? I would say no, because that Buffalo-Houston game was going to be one of our better games of the year, right? Those are two playoff teams, and that Houston team is on the ascendancy, man. They were a lot of fun last year. And don't forget the schedule makers whiffed entirely on the Texans last year. We had them literally in 0 national television windows. So we tried to use flexible scheduling and tried to find a good home for them. We were thinking about a Monday night game in New York at one point. I think we ended up moving a 1 o'clock game to a 4 o'clock game, or maybe vice versa to try to get it a bigger footprint. Like, we whiffed on the Texans last year at this time. I'm always wary of who we're going to whiff on again. But as the Texans became a story down the stretch, then you did try to find more windows for them. We ended up putting them in that Saturday Week 18 window against Indy, which, again, that perfect sort of, hey, you both have everything to play for on Saturday. And then you have to watch on Sunday and see how Jacksonville does. And that was the perfect set of circumstances. And I don't remember the exact number, but I think 19 or 20 million people watched that Texans-Colts game on Saturday night. And then when they made the playoffs, this wasn't the first time you'd seen the Texans. You just watched them last week. You know the story. Most everybody had put CJ on their fantasy team. Like, we've been watching the Texans for a few months at that point. The Texans have earned this. They have ascended into that. Are they in the Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore? Maybe not just yet, but man, they are knocking on the door.
So whenever the schedule comes out, there will be plenty to talk about. I know we already know where these guys are going, and we just don't know when. But that still doesn't make this any less exciting. I love finding out the schedule. I love getting to figure out when I'm going to go to different places. I know a lot of fans feel the exact same way. You always have things that you're hoping for. Like for me, for example, I've never been to Vancouver. I've been to Seattle, but I would love for the Bills to play in Seattle the week before the bye week because then I could try and take a little bit of a vacation, go up to Vancouver. I would love to see them go to Baltimore early in the year, where it would overlap with a potential game at Camden Yards with the Orioles. I would love to go get a chance to see the Orioles. And then you have your other things like going to New York around Christmas time is always so much fun. And these are things that fans care about too because Bills fans travel so well. So the schedule should be coming soon. I think there's a good chance they play on a holiday. I think there's a great chance that they get the maximum amount of primetime games, which is 6. And I think it's another season where the Bills are playing in a lot of big windows because people love watching the Bills. They love watching Josh Allen. We should find out soon enough.